In this war of mine, you need a fighter, someone who can defend your shelter but also go out and take out some raiders when needed. Today's character fits that bill. Welcome back to a Survivor's Guide to This War of Mine. Today we will be going over everything Roman. Roman's trait is trained in combat, and as he used to be a member of the militia, this makes a lot of sense. It also means he gets the highest rank for combat and guarding at S tier. His combat is so good that he can backstab a variety of enemies even with weaker weapons. He also has no downsides compared to the two others who can kill with backstabs, as Arica can't lure people with sound and Boris is incredibly slow. Roman, in comparison, makes noise for luring and has a medium speed. On the personality side, he is an egoist, and therefore cares mostly for himself and doesn't really care for his fellow survivors, and even less about people outside of that. If he gets even more traumatised by the war, he can become aggressive, which is the worst personality type in the game, as it leads to more fights with the other survivors. The only other thing to mention here is that he does have an addiction to smoking, and weirdly has a high proficiency with the guitar, so he does have one way to improve morale. Now we have gone through the mechanics of his character, we will move on to his story. We'll start with his happy story, then his sad story, before moving on to the endings. Roman's happy story. I was at the front line since the shit got serious. My unit was always the first to go in and the last to get out. After I lost a quarter of my men, the elders decided we needed some R&R. That's how I wound up in Pogoran, where all was quiet. It was not to last. Number 2. The battle for Pogoran was short and ugly. When the man in the street can turn out to be the enemy, people start taking precautions, like shooting anyone who looks at them funny. I'm not saying I did that, but I was the minority. Number 3. After we finished carving up the city between ourselves and the enemy, things got even uglier. Entire groups of civilians were brought in for questioning, and much too often shot so as to not leave witnesses behind, I guess. I wanted no part of that. I'm a fighter, not a murderer. Number 4. One night I changed into my old garb and just walked away. My mate was on duty. I told him I was off to get some ass and that I'd be back by dawn. I hope he didn't catch too much shit for letting me through. Roman's sad story. Number 1. Ever since the fighting started, I was in the thick of it with my unit. The arseholes from HQ let us rest only when a quarter of my people were dead. And they sent us to Pogoran of all places, where the carnage was worse than at the front line. Number 2. The worst thing about the fights in Pogoran was that you never knew if the man whom you'd pass in the street was working for the enemy or not. So I told my men to be extra suspicious. Better to shoot one more guy than to let the fucker turn around and stab you in the back. Number 3. After the borders between our turf and the enemies were more or less stable, things got even uglier. Entire groups were rounded up and some people shot after having been interrogated. One day, we were ordered to dispose of a bunch of poor bastards. I recognised one of them. It was Leon, my best childhood buddy. I aimed over their heads. Others didn't. After that, I couldn't look my people in the face. I wanted to kill them, or kill myself, or blow up the whole compound. I ended up just running away one night. I have no idea what I'll say if I ever meet them. I don't know if I was too weak, or if they were. This gives us the only view we have of the other side of the war, of those actually fighting. Roman managed to escape that life, but what life awaits him after the war? Well, that depends on how your game with him goes. If Roman gets killed during the war. As so many other tough-as-nails guys, Roman didn't make it. His motivations will remain unknown to his buddies, and some of them still think he betrayed them. If Roman kills himself, unable to accept the reality in which he had to live, hating himself for not being stronger and more in control of his life, Roman killed himself. He left no notes or goodbyes. If Roman leaves the shelter one night. Roman disappeared from the shelter one night, leaving no note. He survived the war, but was soon arrested for murder and sentenced to 15 years in prison. If you reject Roman when he comes to the door. Roman had to seek shelter elsewhere. His military background was deemed more of a problem than an asset. If Roman makes it to the end of the war, but with bad karma. Roman survived the war. Tortured by his past, he started doing hard drugs, and a few years later died of drug-related health problems. If Roman makes it to the end of the war, but in a sad state. Roman survived the war, but avoided his old haunts. Anxious to meet his former comrades, he settled in the countryside and started to live a new life, but remained haunted by his past. And finally, if Roman makes it to the end of war in good spirits and without being too traumatized. After the war, Roman sought out his former buddies, and much to his great relief, learned that most of them admired his courage and the decision he made. He returned to his neighborhood and became a leader of the local community. And so that is Roman. I hope you found this video interesting, and if you did, please do like, subscribe, and consider donating to War Child. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video, which is the final base game character, Ta-Ra.